Hey everybody, it's me, Robert Phoenix, and it's casual Friday. It's a casual Friday sort of day today, and so I'm running a little late. And I appreciate you hanging out for the interim while we launch the show. So I was trying to find a good background today, and so I chose the background for one of my favorite movies of all time, Rolling Thunder, with William Devane and Tommy Lee Jones. And William Devane winds up becoming a freaking killing machine in this movie. It's a really very honest kind of film, written by Paul Schrader. So Paul Schrader doesn't pull a lot of punches. That's the guy who wrote the script for Taxi Driver and also Hardcore with George C. Scott. So yeah, we got a little Rolling Thunder background today, and I don't have a huge show in store for us, but we're gonna spend some time looking at Project 2025, which seems to be the hot button topic of the day, right? Like there are people inside the Democratic Party, inside these mm, special interest political groups who believe that Project 2025, or Project 25 for short, is going to essentially deconstruct everything that has been created in the 20th century, the wonderful world of equality and rights and everything that stands for. And we know how well that's going, that it's going to tear all that progress down and essentially return the country to sort of a pre-antebellum plantation state where women don't have a lot of rights. So think of pre-antebellum plantation meets Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale. That's what they think is going to happen. And first of all, in order for them to completely understand Project 2025, they would literally have to go through 400 pages of copy that's associated with Project 2025. Given the fact that most people don't read anymore anyway, what are the odds that those people who really believe that this is much better, Mike, that that they fully understand what this thing is about? They don't. They don't. And honestly, I'm not here today before you to tell you that I fully understand it either, because there's too much to cover just in terms of all the different segments of the government that it wants to be reordered, right? So we're going to get into that today, and we're going to get into the group that has produced this sprawling 400-page work. We'll look at some of the things that they want to do, and we'll try to keep it moving as quickly as possible so we can get in as much information as we can. So bottom line, here's the map of the show. We're going to look at the Heritage Foundation. Who are they? Where did they come from? How did they begin to assert power in Washington, D.C.? Was there an earlier version of Project 2025? And yes, there was. And what was it? And who was in charge of implementing it? Part of the story, right? So we're gonna spend some time with the Heritage Institute, and then we're gonna We're going to do a bit of a scrum with the Project 2025 material. And again, we're talking over 400 pages and basically hitting every single branch of the government. So if you run across anybody who has sound bites as their talking point for Project 2025, and it doesn't matter what side they're on, they could be on the left and they could point their fingers and say, oh, this is evil. This is, look it up, y'all. This is the conspiracy. This is where everything's going. I seriously doubt if they went through every single page in the document. Now, you can buy the book. There is a book, a hardcover book that you can get if you want. And there's also a PDF. So we'll be kind of going through the PDF a little bit. We'll be scrolling through that. And again, we're not going to cover everything because it'd be virtually impossible to do that. But I thought it would be good to at least have a primer or a primer, as they say, right? So that you have some understanding. You may not understand all of it. You may not be able to connect every single dot and break it down chapter and verse to somebody who has questions. But at least, hopefully, by the end of today's show, you'll know a little bit more and you'll be a little more informed. And when these people start spouting their utter nonsense, you'll know it's utter nonsense. So that's what we're going to do today. And we'll do it for maybe about an hour once we get into it. I'm not going to have a terribly long show. So it's just really a meet and greet with Project 2025. Right. We're just shaking hands, talking, exchanging business cards. Where do you like to get coffee in town? Where do you go for Mexican food? That sort of thing. Right. Before that, I would be remiss if I did not address what happened last night with whatever that was. So you got a two for yesterday. You got a two for with Joe Biden. First, you had him earlier in the day refer to Zelensky as Putin. Zelensky was there. He was there. He was in the room. Didn't look too happy. Did not look too happy. And then, and this is the part that's really weird, right? Then, it's sort of like in football. There's a coin toss. You win the coin toss. In the old days, you would elect to receive the kick. So we use old day rules, right? You're like, okay, good. We're going to get the kick. We've got this guy back here who's dangerous. He could take it to the house. This is good. It's good. So the kickoff happens, and the return man fumbles the ball, right? It's kind of like if you watch the Super Bowl between the Patriots and the Seahawks. I'm sorry, the Broncos and the Seahawks with Peyton Manning, right? And there's that first play where the center hikes it past Peyton Manning and it goes into the end zone for a safety. You knew that the Broncos were about to get their horsey hinds kicked all over that field. So he basically fumbled the very first play of the game, right? Totally fumbled it. He calls Harris Vice President Trump. Now, what's interesting is that all those people that he called on during that press conference, they all knew that they were on the slate, that they were going to get the question, right? They were on the slate. They were going to get the question. And supposedly he knew what the question was. Now, somebody said that Well, maybe he had teleprompter responses for every question. That, by the way, would not be out of the realm of possibility. Because if they knew what the question was, which they did, and they knew and ordered the sequence of the people who had asked the questions, once the question was asked, the teleprompter response could come across the screen and he could read it. If you wanted to control the environment, if you wanted to control whatever came out of his mouth, that's what you would do. Easy. So if that's true and they were actually doing that, somebody had suggested that they actually put Vice President Trump inside the teleprompter response to fuck him up, right? To basically sabotage whatever kind of chance that he would have. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, right? But now you have people on the left who are starting to think like the paranoid conspiracy theorists on the right. Welcome to the party. We've been waiting for you. We have been waiting for you to join us so that you could have your eyes opened and you can see just how much um, theater, propaganda, mind control, and bullshit you've been gobbling up 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 30 days a month, 12 months for a year for the last 4 years. And even before that, like how when Joe Biden was running for president, he was even polling well. I mean, he was somewhere like around 5 or 6%. He was not doing well. Right. And then they had a meeting. They had a meeting and they basically said, look, it's going to be Biden. Why? Because Biden had the donors. Biden had the keys to the old school Democratic coffers. Bernie Sanders didn't. Like Bernie Sanders was funded. It was like the Ron Paul model. The Bernie Bros funded Bernie. The Democrats, they weren't Bernie people at all, right? So when you look at the Democrats as they exist now, they are really pro corporation, right? They're all in on the pharmaceutical companies, right? They're all in on BlackRock. Like they're all in on big corporations. And of course, that's not really what Sanders is about. And the Democrats will always, pretend that they're there for, the rights of the people and the workers. It's just bullshit. Right? It's total bullshit. But they made a call. They made a call before Super Tuesday that they were going to get behind Biden. And then if you look at what happened with Super Tuesday, they all start to drop out. Elizabeth Warren drops out. So basically, by the time it's all said and done, and by the time he gets to South Carolina, whatever, and John Lewis gives him the blessing, right? That's it. And at that point, it's just a dog and pony show with him and Bernie Sanders. But it was the money. It was the donor money that was behind Biden that made them make that decision. Just like they did in 2016, it was the donor money behind Hillary Clinton, which essentially forced Bernie Sanders to shut the fuck up and take his money and be a good little boy and play along with the party because he's a party apparatchik. And he's always been. He would never run as a third party candidate because he's a good party boy. Right. So, but we all knew. We all watched. We all saw it. We're like, this motherfucker. He couldn't govern a bingo tournament at the senior center. He couldn't. And he was theoretically even in better shape back then, right? Whoever, whatever was posing as Biden. But we all knew, we all saw nobody went to his fucking rallies. It's a huge psyop. It was a huge psyop because when the hammer dropped and the votes were counted, talk about some massive disconnect between what we had witnessed and what had theoretically happened. And I think that played a big role in the 2020 election. Set them up and knock them down. So now, if you go back then and you look at most of the Democrats were, anything but Trump, anybody but Trump. That's it. They didn't care. They didn't care. Anybody but, and so given the fact that if that was true, and I think we all can agree that the tabulation in 2020 left a lot to be desired. And I don't know if you saw this or not, but Gretchen Whitmer just passed this bill in Michigan that essentially doesn't allow people to audit or question election results. Now, I'm not sure if that's just within the state of Michigan or that's with federal elections as well, but Gretchen Whitmer is basically patching up that back door. Well, I wonder why. So the idea here is if they had the mechanism. So, all right. One of the reasons why it was important to have Biden, again, this is all because of the donors. The donors and the people who've been doing business with Biden for decades. He's the guy. He was the senator from the credit card state. He basically managed a bunch of PO box numbers in Delaware, where they're all, basically having their corporate tax-free status, right? So there was a lot of corporate and institutional money and Democratic donor money that would get behind Biden. It wouldn't get behind Amy Klobuchar because she didn't have those relationships, right? Biden had been doing this thing and building these contacts and making these deals and having these paybacks for a very long time. There was nobody in the race that had the same kind of political portfolio, as it related to donors, deals that Biden had. There was nobody there, right? Buttigieg, he's green. Elizabeth Warren, no, sorry, wouldn't have it. Again, Bernie Sanders doesn't fit the profile. So that's why they chose Biden. It was really all about the money, right? And if you were going to run a voting operation where a lot of money was going to change hands to make sure that certain things occurred, right? You would need as much money as possible to make that happen. Now, we could have a discussion about the summer of Floyd, right? And all the money that went to Share Blue, which was taking in all the donations for Black Lives Matter, because, oh my God, we feel so bad that we have to make things right? They accrued a shit ton of money. Share Blue, shit ton of money, right? So they if you go back and look at what was happening, they were putting together a massive war chest. Now, did the war chest amount to TV ads and all the things that would go along with having your candidate elected? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that war chest was essentially going out to pay people to do whatever it took to get him elected, whether it was harvesting ballots. By the way, people got paid for that, right? And there were a lot of ballot harvesters, a lot of them. So you had to pay those people. You had to pay the people in the precincts. I mean, there was so much money changing hands. So you needed the most economically viable candidate in order to make sure that not only was the money there, but the political favors or the political connections were there to make this thing happen. And everybody else that was running did not have it. Whatever you think of Biden and his condition and state, whatever, right? He has a very thick black book on Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. And that is essentially what they tapped into. And that's how he got there. Had nothing to do with his proficiency, had nothing to do with his ratings, right? It was all about the money behind him. From a psychological perspective, whoever was anti Trump, they would have voted for anybody. They would have voted for Amy Klobuchar. And again, if Amy Klobuchar had the political capital and the financial capital that Biden had, we might be under an Amy Klobuchar presidency. I'm serious with this, but she didn't, and that's not why she's there, right? Because it didn't matter. They were voting for basically a senile old man, and they didn't care. Anybody but Trump. That was it, man. That was the mandate. Now, was that enough to swing the vote? Probably not. So that's when the other piece comes in, right? That's when his background, history, money, connections, plus the share blue stuff. And now they got a big fucking war chest and they can move mountains, which theoretically, supposedly, more than likely, they did. But everybody knew, even those people going in there, checking that box, anybody but Trump, fuck you, Trump, fuck you, Trump, fuck you, Trump. Really, that's what that was about. That was a fuck you, Trump vote. And they didn't care. Because again, you may think that your average Democratic voter or progressive person is dumb, right? Oh, they're just, you know, they're just stupid. A lot of these people are really smart, which boggles the mind. I'm telling you. Like, I used to hang out on this message board, and it was this Golden State Warriors message board. And the demographic of the message board was, I would say, probably about 70% Jewish progressive, 20% black, and then maybe 10% of the rest of us, right? Seriously, that was the demographic of this message board. So when when it was non-basketball talk and return to politics, they would start to talk about the Democratic Party and the candidates. And these guys that were driving the conversation were not stupid. They were professionals, right? One was a lawyer, the other was a commercial real estate developer. This other guy was kind of a high level tech software engineer. Like, these were not stupid people. And yet their political beliefs were mind boggling. They were mind boggling. Like, this one guy, his name is Rick. He's really bright. He's one of those, pocket protector engineering types. And he just so happened to be Jewish, but that's besides the point. And so he's not dumb. And yet he's making these cases for these candidates that are, and again, this is pre 2016. Because by 2016, I'm starting to, I'd stopped going to this message board. So this is somewhere in between like 2008 and I don't know, like maybe 2012, 2006. Actually, I started going to the message board around 2002 to about 2011. It's about 9 years. So we're talking what, like two terms of Obama. And they would say, like, politically, some of the stupidest shit Like, how can you really believe this? How can you support this program? And then they would have some kind of quasi philosophical or ideological justification. And I'd be like, you're just going along with the party. Because if you were really thinking independently, you being the smart engineering pocket protector nerd could see the situation much more clearly. And you would be advocating a different course of action or a different choice. But no, you're just going along with the party. That's what they do. They just go along with the party. Whatever the party needs. Just like Bernie Sanders, good little party boy. Right? So here's Biden. It's whatever the party needs. And they're smart enough to know that it's not about Biden. They're smart enough to know it's about the cabinet. You have the visible cabinet and then the invisible cabinet, right? They're smart enough to know that. They didn't care because they knew that ultimately his handlers would run the show and that they would be in line with the party's goals ultimately, right? But they knew. People knew. The people that voted for him knew. So you had the anything but Trump, and then you had the, well, we know that he's probably not at the top of his game, but he's got all these other people behind him, and we'll be good. Right? We'll have our agenda met, and we don't have to deal with Trump. They made a deal with the devil. They made a deal with the devil, and now the devil is coming home because that's what Joe Biden is doing. He's bedeviling the party. Whatever you think of Biden, whoever you think he is, whatever. Right? The visage of Joe Biden is bedeviling the party. When you get people like Rob Reiner and George Clooney and all these dyed-in-the-wool Democratic Hollywood talking heads basically saying, please step down, please step down, please step down, right? You know that there's a rift in the party. There is a rift. They don't want him there, right? Now you don't want him. Oh, I see. He was good enough for the last 4 years to get out there and be the face of the wrecking ball of America, but now you don't want him, right? I'm thrilled. I think it's great. I think it's great. And again, I don't think it's great because, well, Trump is going to be the person who's going to benefit from this. No, I think it's great because I like to see in group fighting with people like the Democrats and the Republicans, by the way, when these issues that they get hung up on and support and their institutional issues, right? In just the players themselves, when there's a crack of light for truth to come through and it's starting to come through, I love it. It's great. You know, I talked about this when we were looking at the eclipse. And I talked about how when you looked at the 2017 eclipse and it went basically west to east, right? And then the 2020 eclipse, which went north to south. So the first eclipse cut the country in half, and the second eclipse cut the country in quarters. And then I basically was calling it the great quartering. Well, yeah, look what's happening. The Democratic Party is now cut in half. Like they're literally split. Right? They're literally split. So we're watching this division happen inside the Democratic Party. It'll happen in the Republican Party as well. Right? It will happen there too, if it hasn't already happened, because of course you have the pro-Trump side, then you have the Liz Cheney side, right? So we're seeing sort of the division in half and then the division in quarters as well. I put up a bit of a meme here yesterday on Facebook, on Twitter, which I wanted to just post, and then we'll get into this Project 25 because I thought it was, and I talked about this on Sunday night, and it really does speak to kind of where where the Democratic Party is. And yeah, we know there's a uniparty, right? But this is their branch of the uniparty. So I talked about on Sunday night how Joe Biden is a Scorpio. And I use the analogy of the scorpion and the frog. And this is exactly what's happening. Remember the story of the scorpion and the frog? Joe Biden, Scorpio, is the scorpion, and the DNC is the frog. And so what's happening is that he's literally, just by staying around, he is poisoning the DNC. He's poisoning it. And that's what a Scorpio does, right? Or scorpion. So anyway, the only thing that concerns me is the fact that we have this really shaky figurehead. Really, really shaky figurehead. And so internationally, not the best. Not the best. I think that they're going to try to ride this thing out with Biden. That's my sense. They're going to try and ride this thing out for as long as they can. And then the Kamal is on the bench. Could they run a Hillary Clinton Kamal ticket? I don't think so. Because you're putting a so-called white woman ahead of a so-called black woman. Would Hillary Clinton be willing to play Kamala Harris's vice president? No fucking way. Right? So they can't pair them up. They can't. So if they go with the Kamal or Mamala, they would have to hold on one second. So if they were going to go with the Mamala, I think they'd probably have to have my sense is they'd probably go with Pete Buttigieg or whatever fuck his name is. Because it would be kind of a power move, right? She'd be on top of a white guy, not even a straight white guy. Newsom and Kamala can't be on the same ticket. At the end of the day, I still think the odds-on favorite is Mike Johnson. That's my odds-on favorite, but that's based on a contested election and a country in chaos. All right, let's get into the Heritage Foundation. These are the people that have created Project 2025. So let's get a little background into the Heritage Foundation. Wikipedia is really good for just simple, straight background stuff. Every now and then there'll be something in Wikipedia where you look and go, oh, you guys let that slip through the cracks? Okay. All right. So let's just read through this quickly. The Heritage Foundation, sometimes simply referred to as Heritage, is an activist American conservative think tank based in Washington, D.C., founded in 1973. It took a leading role in the conservative movement in the 1980s during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, whose policies were taken from Heritage Study Foundations, including its Mandate for Leadership. Okay, so Mandate for Leadership is basically the original version of Project 2025. So it's not like this is anything new. And all of these think tanks will put together their syllabi, their strategic playbooks. All of them do. Right. So when the new president comes in, they sit down and, oh, here you go, Mr. President. You and your cabinet should look at this because we really think that this is where the direction of the country should be headed. The Heritage Foundation was founded February 16th, 1973, which, by the way, makes it an Aquarian group. How about that? And it was founded during the Nixon administration by Paul Weyrich, Edwin Fuellner, and Joseph Coors. Yes, that Joseph Coors of the Coors Brewing Company in Golden, Colorado, growing out of the new business activist movement inspired by the Powell Memorandum. Is that Enoch Powell? No, Lewis Franklin Powell. Okay. And the discontent with Richard Nixon's embrace of the liberal consensus. Weyrich, that advance. Okay, Weyrich. Where is it? Where is it? Lower and the non-polemical, cautious nature of existing think tanks, right? So they wanted to create something that was kind of far right. Weyrich and Fuellner sought to create a conservative version of the Brookings Institution that advanced conservative policies. So they wanted to go even more conservative than Brookings. In its early years, Coors was Heritage Foundation's primary funding source. Weyrich was the foundation's first president. Later, under Weyrich's successor, Frank J. Walton, the Heritage Foundation began using direct mail fundraising, which contributed to the growth of its annual income, which reached $1 million a year in 1976. By 1981, the annual budget grew to $5.3 million. The Heritage Foundation advocated for pro-business policies and anti-communism in its early years, but distinguished itself from the American Enterprise Institute by also advocating for cultural issues that were important to Christian conservatives. So the AEI was one of the think tanks that created the clear break doctrine, which was all about what would happen if there was a crisis in that would occur to America, like something like 9/11, and what a crisis like that would allow the country to do. Like the clear break was, we are going to break away from business as usual. We are going to develop new foreign policy, and that foreign policy will all be based on preemptive strikes, right? That was the clear break doctrine, which ultimately winds up becoming morphed into the Patriot Act. So they're a bit different, and I would say that the AEI would probably lean more into the Zionist right. Now, I think at this time in the 70s, the Christian conservative movement had not been fully subsumed by their love affair with Israel, right? That it was kind of a thing on its own. You know, Christian conservatives were kind of a thing unto themselves, like in the 60s and the 70s. By the time we start to get into the 80s and especially the 90s with the creation of the mega churches, and then we have this broad application of dispensationalism, and then you have hucksters like Hagee in San Antonio who will promote this thing to the max so he can get a gymnasium named after him in Israel. Anyway, this is kind of hardcore Christian Zionist political flexing. You would find more of that in the AEI versus the Heritage Foundation. All right, let's keep going. In January 1981, the Heritage Foundation published Mandate for Leadership, a comprehensive report aimed at reducing the size of the federal government and provided public policy guidance to the incoming Reagan administration and included over 2,000 specific policy recommendations on how the Reagan administration could utilize the federal government to advance conservative policies. The report was well received by the White House, and several of its authors went on to take positions in the Reagan administration. Ronald Reagan liked the idea so much that he gave a copy to each member of his cabinet to review. Among the 2,000 heritage proposals, approximately 60% of them were implemented or initiated by the end of Reagan's first year in office. Reagan later called the Heritage Foundation a vital force during his presidency. So they make a big splash, right? The Heritage Foundation was influential in developing and advancing the Reagan Doctrine, a key Reagan administration foreign policy initiative under which the U.S. began providing military and other support to anti-communist resistance movements fighting Soviet-aligned governments in Afghanistan, Angola, Cambodia, Nicaragua, and other nations during the final years of the Cold War. So the Angola War was already happening under Carter, and the CIA was already there in Angola. I guess they just threw more money in. Afghanistan, of course, becomes really important during that time, right? Because we get behind the Afghani rebels and we start training them and we start giving them weapons so that they can take on the Russians. Nicaragua gets messy, right? Nicaragua, you've got the Sandinistas and the Contras. So Reagan's backing the Contras. And then you get into the whole weird, like, fucking, Mena, Arkansas, cocaine, Panama, Nicaragua. Iran-Contra is just weird and dark and laden with drugs, drug money, weapons, right? It's not the best. They're keeping this kind of tighty-whitey here. When Reagan met with Mikhail Gorbachev in Moscow in the 1980s, the Wall Street Journal later reported the Soviet leader offered a complaint. Russia was influenced by the Heritage Foundation, Washington's conservative think tank. The outfit lent intellectual energy to the Gippers agenda, including the Reagan Doctrine, the idea that America should support insurgents resisting communist domination. The Heritage Foundation also supported the development of a new ballistic missile defense system. In 1983, Reagan made the development of this new defense system, known as the SDI, or the Strategic Defense Initiative, his top priority. By mid-decade, the Heritage Foundation began emerging as a key organization in the national conservative movement, publishing influential reports on a broad range of policy issues by prominent conservative thought leaders. In 1986, in recognition of the Heritage Foundation's fast-growing influence, Time magazine labeled the Heritage Foundation the foremost new breed of advocacy tanks. During the Reagan and subsequent George H.W. Bush administrations, the Heritage Foundation served as the brain trust on foreign policy to both administrations. So even when there is a Democrat in office, Heritage grew. So here's where they kind of lose the plot. The Heritage Foundation remained an influential voice on domestic and foreign policy issues during President George H.W. Bush's administration in 1990 and 1991. The foundation was a leading proponent of Operation Desert Storm, designed to liberate Kuwait following Saddam Hussein's invasion and occupation of Kuwait. In August 19, according to the Baltimore Sun, Washington Chief Bureau, Frank Starr, the Heritage Foundation studies laid much of the groundwork for Bush administration thinking post-Soviet foreign policy. Well, that was a big fucking mistake because it was all based on bullshit. It was all based on propagandized lies. So now, does the Heritage Foundation just fall for the propagandized lies? Or do they know about it and they don't care because it's part of their doctrine? In 1994, the congressional elections, Republicans took control of the House of Representatives, and Newt Gingrich was elected as new House Speaker in January 1995, largely based on commitments made in the Contract with America, which was issued 6 weeks prior to the 1994 elections. The contract was a pact of principles that directly challenged the political status quo in Washington, D.C., and many ideas at the heart of the Clinton administration. The Heritage Foundation also became engaged in the culture wars, publishing the Index of the Leading Cultural Indicators by William Bennett In 1994, the index documented how crime, illegitimacy, divorce, teenage suicide, drug use, and 14 other social indicators had worsened measurably since the 1960s. Okay, so um, they supported the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Um, the Heritage Foundation challenged opposition to the war. They defended George W. Bush's administration's treatment of suspected terrorists at Guantanamo Bay. So my thinking is that somewhere along the way, the Heritage Foundation gets infiltrated. This is what happens with all groups. They start off as a group that's based on some form of physical restraint, lesser government, and the government that they're going to invest in is going to have provisions that will wind up being more conservative and less liberal. And it comes down to both spending, which would be economic, and social programs, which would be social. So you have the socioeconomic. And then somewhere along the way, like they become pro war candidates. And I don't have the changing of the guard in the roster of the Heritage Foundation, but I would assume that somewhere along the way, that the same people that had the same kind of political buy-in with Brookings or the American Enterprise Institute would be the same people who would ultimately matriculate into the Heritage Foundation. That's my educated, intuitive grasp of the situation. And if I spent probably about an hour going through the roster of who these people were that eventually moved into Heritage and looked at their relationships with these other people, it wouldn't be that hard. And then what you find is you find that these think tanks now are basically being quote unquote manned by generally the same people that have the same political objectives, although one think tank might advocate for peanut butter and jelly, and they're into strawberry jam, and then the other think tank would be peanut butter and jelly, and they may be into raspberry jam. You wouldn't really be able to tell the difference unless you were a connoisseur of the berry jam, right? So that's kind of where this has gone, in my opinion. Now, with this Project 2025, what they're trying to do is recreate sort of the ideological and, for lack of a better term, vibrational template of the Reagan playbook. All right, so let's just go there and let's take a look. And again, we're not going to be able to get through all this. Looks like we got to freeze. We got to freeze. Here we go. Hold on. Let's see. All right. Just give me like 2 minutes, and I'll be back. This is a bad spinning rainbow wheel of death. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I've been holding off using my new computer because I'm trying to find a workaround with the Google shit, and I just haven't wanted to pollute it yet. All right. Hard reset. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back, and we'll pick up the ball when I return. Thanks. And with that, we are back. Thank you for your patience. And without any further delay, let's get into it. Let's get into it. All right. So this, boys and girls, is Project 2025, the 180-day playbook. So they are essentially creating what the next conservative president will do in the first 180 days. Sounds efficient, right? Now, where does it come from? This is where it comes from. Mandate for a new leadership or for leadership via a PDF. Yeah, you got that number correct. It's 922 pages via PDF. I believe the Project 2025 book is over 400 pages. Let me just get it up. Yeah. So it came out in 2023, and you can get it used if you want, but there's also the PDF version. And it doesn't say how many pages it has. I think it's about 400 pages. It's funny. The author is Patrick Henry. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's look at the PDF, and let's just kind of dive down into it. Again, it's really hard to do a show based on 922 pages. So when these people talk about how just go look it up, right? They're probably, and again, I'm not here to like advocate for this, but they're really just going through somebody's talking points that they've distilled and pulled out of a 900 fucking page PDF. I guarantee you, none of these people read the entire thing. So they go through every single branch of the government here. Let's just go through it, right? Number one, you have the foreword, A Promise to America by Kevin D. Roberts, PhD. Section 1, Taking the Reins of Government, White House Office, Rick Dearborn, right? Page 23. Executive Office of the President of the United States, Russ Vought, page 43. So you got 20 pages of just the White House office alone. Central Personnel Agencies Managing the Bureaucracy, right? That's going to start page 69. And you've got Donald Devine, Dennis Dean Kirk, and Paul Dans. Then you get into even more granular chapters. The Department of Defense, Christopher Miller, Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli, Department of State, Chiron Skinner, Intelligence Community, Dustin J. Carmack, media agencies, U.S. Agency for Global Media, Maura Namdar, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Mike Gonzalez, Agency for International Development, Max Primorak. Then you get into general welfare, Department of Agriculture, Education, Energy and Related Commission, EPA, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Department of the Interior, Department of Justice, Department of Labor related agencies, Department of Transportation, Department of Veterans Affairs, right? Like then it goes into the economy, Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, Export Import Bank, the case for Export Import Bank. There's a whole section on the Federal Reserve, which, by the way, they do not advocate removing. We'll get into that. Small Business Administration, trade. You got a little Peter Navarro action in there, the guy that's in prison right now. The case for fair trade. Then you have the case for free trade. Independent regulatory agencies. The SEC related agencies, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FCC, the FEC, the FTC, And then by the time you get to page 883, it is onward. So this is a complete um, re-rendering of every department of the government. And this is based on, the best and brightest that they can bring to the table. And again, my purpose and goal here today is to get you to understand the document a little bit better, not to fully give you the entire. It's impossible for me to do that. Even if I read all 893 pages, we would have at the minimum a 4 to 5 hour show just going over this thing with a fine tooth comb, right? So I'm giving you the tools if you want to go in and read more of this. And we'll read some of it. I'm not going to just drop you at the curb. But I just wanted you to get an understanding that this first of all, this secret plan that they have to overturn all of the social liberties of the 20th century is not that very secret. It's not that very secret. You can go on the internet and read about it. That's how secret it is. Nobody's hiding anything. These people are proud of this work. Trust me. It wasn't hard for me to find. But again, the sheer density and breadth of the document, I seriously doubt any of these people have spent any time even reviewing 2 or 3 chapters. So here are a number of other groups that support the work. There's a lot of them here. Some of them you might know, like Hillsdale College, maybe the James Madison Institute for Energy Research. So all these groups they're on board, right? They say, yeah, we're with it. You don't see Brookings in here though, and you don't see AEI because they have their own playbooks. Okay, so let's just get into some of this. So this is all the forward. I'm going to skip the forward. Um, now this is kind of, I would say, somewhat interesting. They have the 4 pillars of the new quote unquote conservative presidential candidate and whoever comes along with that candidate. So pillar 1, this volume puts in one place consensus view of how federal agencies must be governed and where disagreement exists. Brackets out these differences for the next president to choose a path. Pillar 2 is a personnel database that allows candidates to build their own professional profiles. And our coalition members to review and voice their recommendations. These recommendations will then be collated and shared with the president-elect's team, greatly streamlining the appointment process. So if Trump had this maybe in 2016, he might have made some better appointments, but due to the fact that he had so many political paybacks, it may not have mattered. Pillar 3 is the Presidential Administration Academy, an online educational system taught by experts from our coalition. For the newcomer, this will explain how the government functions and how to function in government. For the experienced, we will host in-person seminars and advanced training and set the bar for what is expected of senior leadership. And in Pillar 4, it is the playbook. We are forming agency teams and drafting transition plans to move out upon the president's utterance of "So help me God." So this is a very comprehensive approach to getting candidates up to speed with this doctrine. And not only that, but we'll give them support, right? Through this ongoing educational training. All right. So these are the authors. And then, of course, you have the contributors. Well, these are the contributors. Lots and lots and lots of titles and historical background, and these are very important people. All right, let's keep going. Peter Navarro. Yeah, so these are all the authors of the various chapters right here. And I believe that these are contributors, but they are not authors. So these are people that have contributed to some of the ideas inside of heritage that have perhaps some degree of representation inside of this massive document. Some of these people might be recognizable to some of you, and some are probably just under the radar policy wonks. The one name that I did recognize was Ezra Cohen. So Ezra Cohen's a contributor, and some of you people might actually know who some of these people are. Let's see, anybody else? Lots, man. There are a lot of people here. A lot of people. We're just on the G's. Look at that. GH. Look at that. Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's get into one of the chapters. So this is promise number 2, right? They have these different promises. Let's go to promise 1. Promise 1 is restore. Okay, so this is what the progressives or the Dems or whatever. This is what they're looking at. They're just looking at these promises. They're not going any deeper. All right, let's go over the promises. Promise 1, restore the family as a centerpiece of American life and protect our children. The next conservative president must get to work pursuing the true priority of politics, the well-being of the American family. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. In many ways, the entire point of centralizing political power is to subvert the family. Its purpose is to replace people's natural loves and loyalties with unnatural ones. You see this in the popular left-wing aphorism, government is simply the name we give to the things we choose to do together. But in real life, most of the things people do together have nothing to do with government. These are the mediating institutions that serve as the building blocks of any healthy society: marriage, family, work, church, school, volunteering. The name real people give to things we do together is community, not government. Our lives are full of interwoven, overlapping communities. Our individual and collective happiness depends upon them. But the most important community in each of our lives and the life of the nation is the family. I don't disagree with that, by the way. Today, the American family is in crisis. 40% of all children are born to unmarried mothers, including 70% of Black children. There is no government program that can replace the hole in a child's soul cut out by the absence of a father. Now, again, fundamentally, I don't have a problem with that. But for the people who are reading these talking points as if they are the poison arrow, they'll read that and they'll say, excuse me, what about all these strong women that we have in our community? They're basically saying, we're not good enough. We're not strong enough. And I've heard that. I have heard that based on that talking point. How's that working out? Fatherlessness is one of the principal sources of American poverty, crime, mental illness, teen suicide, substance abuse, rejection of the church, and high school dropouts. So many of the problems government programs are designed to solve but can't are ultimately problems created by the crisis of marriage and the family. I would agree. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. If current trends continue, we are heading toward social implosion. I could pull each and every one of you in the chat, and I would say we'd probably be 99% in agreement with that. Furthermore, the next conservative president must understand that using government alone to respond to symptoms of the family crisis is a dead end. Federal power must instead be wielded to reverse the crisis and rescue America's kids from familial breakdown. The conservative promise includes dozens of specific policies to accomplish this existential task. I guarantee you, one of those policies would be to ban surgical sex change operations on minors. I don't have it in front of me, but I guarantee you that's at least one of them. And this is where, again, this is all unspoken here. They're basically saying that we need to do these things. And then the so-called left is creating this tableau of horror, right? That all of a sudden now they're going to come in and control our lives. And I'm not advocating for the Heritage Foundation, but based on that model, like really, how the fuck is that working? It is not really working. It hasn't worked for a while, right? This country got into big problems with FDR and the Great Society, and they got even worse problems with LBJ and the war on poverty. And essentially what this is about, even though I am not here to advocate the document, is to reverse those policies, especially as it relates to the family. Furthermore, the next year must the conservative promise includes some are obvious and long-standing goals like eliminating marriage penalties and federal welfare programs, and the tax code, and installing work requirements for food stamps. But we must go further. It's time for policymakers to elevate family authority formation and cohesion as their top priority, and even use government power, including the tax code, to restore the American family. So you may say, well, why should the government have any role in restoring the American family? Well, that's a really good question. But they certainly had a role in destroying the American family, right? And you would ask, well, why should the government be allowed to destroy the American family? Maybe that should have been the question, but nobody was asking that question in 1965. Today, the left is threatening tax-exempt status of churches and charities that reject woke progressivism. They will soon turn to Christian schools, clubs with the same totalitarian intent. I think if you gave the hardcore progressive social Marxist an inch, they'll take 1,000 miles. And that may be true for any group that goes for power, but clearly we've seen that. Let's see. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency, regulation, contract, grant, regulation, piece of legislation that exists. Pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and the sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and even child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protection. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. I don't really have a problem with that. Their product is addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Yes. Pornography should be outlawed. I really don't have a problem with it. You know, there's always that interesting, what's the definition of pornography? And you know the answer, right? You know it when you see it. right? That's that. Fundamentally, I think that's kind of true. And the access of porn to young men have destroyed it. It's destroyed them, right? It's created a hardcore incel culture, right? It's made intimate relationships much more difficult for women. It's created a whole new cottage industry, which I don't really think is great. Right? Some people may say, "Well, that's true sexual power. That's true sexual freedom." Right? That's true women's liberation. Right? Where they can define their own body in the marketplace and get what they want, can, deserve, right? Like that would be the ultimate extension of feminist thought. The body as commercial product. I don't know. As a father, if I had a girl that was doing that, I wouldn't be down with it. Wouldn't be down with it. So if I wouldn't be if I put myself in that position and I wouldn't be down with it with my own daughter, then I can't be down with other people's. Look, people have the right to do whatever the fuck they want, right? But I think we can agree that what's happened in this country since the sexual revolution, and there are the two P's of the sexual revolution, Playboy and the pill, right? That it has, in many ways, decimated our society, altered our values, and created a culture that is, for all intents and purposes, not family based. I was one of those guys. I went through that, right? That's what I grew up on, and at a certain point, I'm just like, hey, I'm just gonna have my ass some fun here. And then I got some time in the clock, and eventually I can get married, and eventually I can have a kid, and yeah, maybe I can find somebody younger, and that all kind of worked, right? But looking back on it, I would have chosen a different path. I mean, let me rephrase that. I can't change the past. I have my son. I love my son. He's great. I'm grateful that he's in my life, right? But looking back, there was a certain point in my life where I could have made different decisions and different choices, and I didn't make those choices. And they would have been much more conventional, not necessarily conservative, but conventional. And so I understand this, right? I understand what the culture does and what it did to me, and for me, honestly, I could say that it created selfishness. I was selfish. I was going to have as many experiences as I could in a particular realm, that were consensual. And it was my God given American right to do that. And at the end of the day, I was really selfish. And this is what this environment has bred. It's bred that kind of mindset. And now we're way downstream with this thing. Way downstream. So I really don't have a problem with this part, right? But the left clearly allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor is child abuse. It must end. For public institutions to use taxpayer dollars to declare the superiority or inferiority of certain races, sexes, and religions is a violation of the Constitution, civil rights law, and cannot be tolerated by any government anywhere in the country. I mean, look, if you were to come through here and read everything that are part of these promises, you probably would be in agreement with most of them. Now, you may have a different path to getting there, right? So, this is really what the so called left is leaving. All right. So now we have these bullet points. Things like bureaucrats at the Department of Homeland Security following the lead of a feckless administration, order border and immigration enforcement agencies to help migrants criminally enter our country with impunity. Can't argue with that, right? Bureaucrats, the Department of Education, inject racist, anti-American, ahistorical propaganda into America's classrooms. You can't argue with that. Now, that said, the education program was set up by the Rockefellers, right? And what the Rockefellers wanted was a bunch of good worker bees, and they were going to contextualize history in a particular way, right? So they could have people that can essentially come out of high school, go into college, and populate the workforce based on a particular story. Now, some parts of that story aren't true either, right? So we'd probably have to like really dig down and maybe reward homeschooling more than that. Woke bureaucrats at the Pentagon forced troops to attend training seminars about white privilege, and bureaucrats at the State Department infuse U.S. foreign aid programs with woke. This is all true. They're this is not a fiction, but the left sees this and they are shitting their fucking pants, right? But it's not a conspiracy. It's funny, like they read this and interpret this as, you know, if life is going to go back to the 1800s. It's amazing. All right, so you can actually go through here, and you can get a sense and a flavor of, this. What we're in right now is like the broad philosophical conservative approach. It gets into tech, gets into TikTok, gets into China. One of the things that it does not do is it does not address things like dual citizens in government. You're not going to find this in here. You're not going to find anything related to APAC in here. They'll take on socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, right? But they won't. You will not find any mention of Zionism. Okay, so let's keep going. So this is where you get into taking the reins of the government. This is the big document, right? So I think it's probably fairly simple for some members on the so-called left to just read those talking points. But then you get really into the weeds here. It gets into like who the chief of staff is and what their roles are, right? Deputy chiefs of staff, principal. I mean, this is granular. This is basically saying, here's the roles. This is what they're supposed to do. Follow the roles, follow the playbook, and you'll be. I mean, maybe they did this because they're thinking, hey, if Trump comes back, he's going to need all the fucking help he can get because last time he looked lost. Okay, what else do we have here? Let's just keep going deeper. This is all function of government, right? The people that are behind the scenes, this is really just kind of white paper, sort of policy wonk stuff. Okay, I want to get into White House policies. So you can see what I'm talking about here. This thing is really, really dense. And until you go through the entire document, like they get into the president, like they'll talk about what the president does, president's role in all this. I wanted to get into the Department of Homeland Security, National Space Council. Where's the DHS? Let me go to the table of contents. So the DHS is, we're going to look at 133, and then we're going to look at 731. Okay, let's go to 133 and 731. That'll take us up pretty much to the top of the hour. And then I got to get on out of here. hold on. I thought we were. This is the DOD. Hold on. I mean, this is so granular, right? The value of a family military life. That's how granular it gets. Let's make sure of this. Yeah, 133. I don't know why, but we went to 133. It wasn't there. Can we just click on it? There we go. That was easy. Department of Homeland Security. All right, so this is what they plan on doing. Our primary recommendation is that the president pursue legislation to dismantle the Department of Homeland Security. After 20 years, it has not gelled into one DHS. Instead, its various components, different missions, have outweighed its decade-long attempt to function as one department, rendering the whole disjointed rather than cohesive. Breaking up the department along its mission lines would facilitate mission focus and provide opportunities to reduce overhead and achieve more limited government in lieu of a status quo DHS. So what you have here is basically them splitting up the Department of Homeland Security and putting them roughly back into the agencies that they swallowed up post 9/11 to create this one massive super agency. So they're not saying to dismantle it all at once, right? What's interesting here is that they are recommending that the TSA be privatized. Well, it's almost privatized as it is, right? Like the government oversees training, but I believe they work with private contractors to give them the candidates. The private contractors train the government agents on the equipment, right? So the TSA is almost privatized. I don't think it's a bad idea. I'd like to get rid of it in general, period. Right? The whole humiliation ritual of going through the fucking scanner is ridiculous. And it was a huge money making grab post 9/11. So they want to privatize it. Like, what do you like? Who's going to run it? I guarantee you, it'll probably be some Israeli company. Like the same company probably makes the equipment. Oh yeah, we can run it. We'll just run it, right? So now, like, they're not even saying to be privatized and run by an American corporation. They're not saying that. They're just saying privatized, leaving the door open to anybody who can run it, right? So it's mildly interesting, but honestly, I think they should get rid of it. That's just me. Maybe you would agree. So again, what we're talking about here is taking sort of these monolithic structures and begin breaking them down, reassigning and they're also talking about like cutting personnel and cost cutting and all. So they're not advocating getting rid of the government in general, but they are advocating the beginning of downsizing the government. Which brings up a question. Could you just cut everything all at once? Look at that. Ben Carson wrote something. Could you just cut everything all at once? And could the country still run? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think you would have to slowly dismantle these structures. And then on a state level, you would want to ramp up like what the states could do to fill the gap or the void by these so-called federal, right? Federal government. I don't think you could do it all at once. Let's just look at the Federal Reserve part. Let's go there. So the recommendations are not to eliminate the Federal Reserve, but to keep the Federal Reserve intact. Eliminate the dual mandate. The Federal Reserve was originally created to furnish an elastic currency and rediscount commercial paper so the supply of credit could increase along with the demand for money and bank credit. I would say that the Federal Reserve was created to institutionalize usury, but I might be accused of something uh, perhaps not so politically correct. In the 1970s, the Federal Reserve's mission was amended to maintain macroeconomic stability following the abandonment of the gold standard. This included making the Federal Reserve responsible for maintaining full employment, stable prices, and long-term interest rates. Supporters of this more expansive mandate claimed that the monetary policies needed to help the economy avoid or escape recessions. Hence, even if there is a built-in bias toward inflation, that bias is worth it to avoid the pain of economic stagnation. The accommodationist view is wrong. In fact, that same easy money causes the clustering of failures that can lead to a recession. In other words, the dual mandate may inadvertently contribute to recessions rather than fixing them. A far less harmful alternative is to focus the Federal Reserve on protecting the dollar and restraining inflation. This can mitigate economic turmoil, perhaps in conjunction with the government spending. Fiscal policy can be more effective if it is timely, targeted, and temporary. Example from the COVID-19 pandemic is the Paycheck Protection Program, which sustained businesses far more effectively than near zero interest rates, which mainly added asset markets and housing prices. Well, there's some truth to that, but I really think they're going down the wrong rabbit hole there. The right rabbit hole would have been COVID-19 and not the PPP protection as an example of like sound money going in the right direction. Limit the Federal Reserve's lender of last resort function. So if you are involved in uh, the banking industry, right, for a long time, banks would borrow from each other. That's what they would do. If you were a bank and you had a somebody who wanted a, I don't know, $1 million loan, and they were good for it. Like you looked at their credit, you looked at their collateral, you looked at their income, whatever. You're like, okay, we don't really have $1 million to loan this person, but we'd like to be on this business. Generally, you would go to another bank who has more of a war chest, right? And you initiate a loan from that bank. So let's say you initiate the loan at that bank from, I don't know, 6%. We'll call it a 6% loan, right? And you're charging, let's say it's a 5% loan from the bank, and then you're charging the lender 8%, right? So you're still making 3% off that loan, and you're not even putting up any money. This is what was happening with banking, and then the Fed came in and basically discouraged that. And if you want to borrow money, you come to the Fed, and the Fed will loan you the money, right? So the last resort of function really became the Fed being the primary source of lending. So this is the paragraph that mentions that this function should be limited so that banks and other financial institutions be more prudently returning to their traditional role as conservative lenders rather than taking risks that are too large, lead to still another taxpayer bailout. Such a reform should be given plenty of lead time so that banks can self-correct lending practices without disrupting a financial system that has grown accustomed to these activities. Wind down the Fed's reserves balance sheet, limit future balance sheet expansions to U.S. Treasuries, blah, 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 blah. Right? So what they're not saying is They're not saying to eliminate the Fed in general, right? What they want to do is they want to keep it and they want to reform it, and then they think that by instituting these rules and regulations, that they'll be able to uh, get a handle on the Fed and have the Fed work for the government versus the government working for the Fed. Can it be done? I don't know. But I don't. It would be interesting to really ponder a world without the Federal Reserve. And what would that look like? What would that look like? How would lending be done in this country? Right? Like if we and people talk about this, and I'm kind of, I'm in that boat. Like if we remove the Federal Reserve, which we know is neither federal or reserve, their job is just to print money. Right? They print money and then we buy it back from them at interest. That's their role. Right? If we were to eliminate that and somehow try to come back to some principle of sound money or some kind of asset-based economy where the dollar is actually a dollar versus whatever it is now, man, that's going to be a lot of fucking work, right? A lot of work. And we would need some of the best minds in the country in order to create a system that unplugs us from what I would call this usury, right? So in theory, I would love to do it. In practice, you'd really have to be very creative. And also, I think Americans would have to deal with austerity for a while. Like just getting a loan just wouldn't be that easy, unfortunately, right? And it would be kind of across the board. Anyway, so I just wanted to bring this document kind of front and center so that people could get a glimpse of it, right? And the part that the Democrats and the progressives are railing against are those mission statements at the beginning. And those are all based on values, right? They're all based on values. But what they're not addressing is the other 700 pages of what the government is going to look like if the next president's conservative and if they see this as a panacea for restoring the family and restoring the American way of life. So there you go. A little glimpse into Project 2025. And again, it's available for you online. If you're a total information geek, you can get in there and break it down, chop it up, and know what the hell people are talking about or not talking about. All right. I got to run. Thanks for being here. Thank you for allowing me some latitude to get started a little bit later today. Also, thank you to the mods for being your marvelous mod-like self. Hit the like button, please. Subscribe if you like the content. We'll be back Sunday nights. If you feel so inclined, feel free to buy me a cup of coffee in the link. And locals, join locals. We're going to do a Saturn retrograde Pisces webinar coming up here in the next couple of weeks, and I got some cool stuff I'm going to drop in on the locals content wise. So go over there, join locals, support the show. Support truehempscience.com. 15 mins, 15 MINS is your code when you spend $100 or more to get your CBD and your CBD goodie bag. That's it. Thank you. God bless you. Love you all. Treat each other well. Bye for now.